What's going on, everyone? It's your boy Adi. Welcome back to the AU Show, your go-to source for golden gems. Today I have a very special guest on with me. We've gone for months planning this episode. We finally here, but I want to introduce everyone to Brooklyn's very own. He kills it in the finance world during the week, but he knows everything about soccer, arts, any other dope interest you can think of. My boy knows. So everyone, welcome Dupy Mercier to the show. What's going on, my guy?
Hey, Adi, thanks for having me, man. It's great. It's great. It's great. Great coming out. I don't usually turn up like this in public, but since it's you, man, I made the exception.
I appreciate that, man. I take that to heart. But no, like just for the audience, man, like me and Doopy, we will have the most sophisticated conversations for like hours and a half, hour and a half while, I'm on my walk or he's doing whatever. I'm like, such a shame no one else got a chance to actually listen in. So I applied enough pressure. Mind you, we be texting for weeks about this. I'm like, look, we are recording this tomorrow. I don't care how you look. So I'm glad we started this off. But cool, man. Well, hey, I know the city's live. Shout out to the Knicks. I was texting you about it. My FOMO is at an all-time high, given I was just there last year. But yeah, I guess how is the city vibing with the sports being back and the Knicks doing their thing?
It's been great, man. All the Knicks fans in retirement and hiding have come out, and so you see all the hats, the jerseys. Heck, I still even have my old Latrell Sprewell jersey.
Yo, okay. Hey, you might
That's
have to
how
bust
deep
that
this
out.
goes. Yeah, it's great. It's great to see New Yorkers have something to root for and something to be cheerful for, and not just have it be like just another like postseason. You can't be bothered. And then also the biggest thing too about the Knicks is just like being that they call it the Nova Knicks. So there's this whole entire like bringing back like basketball back to the Big Apple, and that's huge because ever since the what I call the destruction of the Big East, where teams just left and went to other conferences, it's like college basketball. Like the Big East tournament used to be a huge thing because I was old school Red Storm fan. Used to love St. John's. Always root for them whenever they turned up in whether that Big East conference or just the March Madness was huge. Almost having like as I said, like the Nova Knicks, it taps into that like old school feel. So you get like the old school basketball heads, plus the younger cats who are just, I guess, coming up in the age of like seeing a successful Knicks team again, which hasn't happened in decades. So it's almost like they bridge the gap. And also too, in addition to that, like you get that feel of like that tough, gritty, like New York City basketball where it's not just about like flashy moves or crossovers. It's just like, nah, you're gonna have to throw that ball in the paint, make those backdoor cuts, make those moves. Not to get too deep in the weeds, but that's just the vibes out here.
I love it, man. No, too, for me, man. I used to work in Midtown, so I would literally pass MSG every day on my way home and to and from work. So I can only imagine what it was like, how active it's been these last 2 weeks. And I think, too, to your point, I obviously wasn't born quite yet during the Fab Five era, but to your point, I think seeing how they bridge the gap between like the Nova Knicks, where they just got some dogs with like Hart, Brunson, Mikhail. I know DiVincenzo had to go, but like it's kind of like the Fab Five or a little bit with the Nova Knicks. I love to see it. I think even though I don't live there anymore, I'd love to see them. Hang up a banner, and hopefully, if they do, we got to see Stephen A. Smith do like the Dreams and Nightmares.
For sure, it would be great. It would be great to see him lose his mind even more.
Yeah, I was worried last time. I'm not gonna hold you. I was like, damn, like if there was a team who could blow that lead in true fashion of like it could be this next, but I'm glad that they took care of it. But anyways, man, I think I always love to start these conversations just like with who the person was at the beginning, right? And so for you, man, I've had a chance to get to know you now, but like when you were like seven, like that 7 to 10 years old, I feel like there's a lot of different characters in school. Like for me, man, I got called into the principal's office for doing some dumb stuff back in the day a couple of times, and so my mom was not appreciative of that. So you have the principal's office people who have like a VIP pass. They're there every week. You got the ones who are literally just in school. Go do my homework. I answer a couple questions in class. I go about my business. Or you have the ones who are truly like the class clowns, the one who just create the stir. They're the ones who are causing the chaos that everyone knows. So I guess given those archetypes, were you any of those, or were you multiple of those, or were you just none of those at all? You were your own lane.
You could say that I was in part my own lane, but I also had elements of, you could say, those things. Because my childhood, you could say in some respects, is weird and also just like non conventional.
Hmm.
Because I like to say that in some respects I didn't have a normal childhood or the archetypical childhood that we expect kids to have. Go out there, have fun. Because in part, the child of two Haitian immigrants, so the West Indian mentality of just grind, work hard, study, become a lawyer, doctor. That was the beating war drum from the age you could learn to read or write. So literally before school would start, like in the summers, be constantly just working, reading. And the reason why I say I'm unique is because literally up until the age of 3, I couldn't speak. At least that's according to what my mother said. And they were worried that like I would have some kind of speech impediment. So by the age of 3, like I had to like go to speech therapists and work on my oratory skills and ability and capacity to speak because I just apparently I was just a mute or just wasn't time for me to say anything until I was 3. And then again, like once I turned 3, it's like just yelling, just being, well, to the capacity I could, being a kid. And I say that in the best respects of growing up in what would be the equivalent of, tough inner city New York City back in the 90s, or I guess what folks call the projects. It was a different kind of lifestyle. Like, it was one of those things where you didn't want to be on the first floor if you could.
Hmm.
If you understand the implications of that, it's more so for like shootouts, robberies, or attempted robberies. It's not to say that you weren't exempted from the other floors. You know, elevators smelling like piss, needles on the sidewalks. The usual archetypes of crack era New York City '90s. But I never really let that get to me as a kid because I would say that I was, in retrospect, like blessed and thanks with the extent or just the idea of having a very extensive imagination. So I never like, grounded myself in my reality with like the harshness of what was going around me. I was always just fascinated by like I was huge into sci-fi as a kid, so I never really. I also love wrestling as any young boy did. WWE, WWF, I do wrestling. Turned the living room into a wrestling match with my brother. I would also say that in part of just my love for sci-fi, I was huge into Star Trek. I wouldn't exactly call myself a Trekkie, but I grew up on shows like The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Enterprise. I love the captains, their different personality quirks, the challenges that they face, the writing of itself. It just like fed my curiosity, like even to the point of like even wanting to become like an astronaut and just want to just go out there and explore and push the limits on just the human spirit, things like that. So that's what like fueled me as a kid, like at least outside of school. In school, to your point about archetypes, I was a bit of a mixed ball. From what I remember, I was a bit all over the place. So, like, give you an example, like in gym class, while they'd have us in lines doing exercises, or at least the gym teachers would try to, I would kind of just be off, like arms flailing, doing my own thing, and they'd make a note of that. And of course, my folks would get on me because they're big into just being disciplinarians. Structure, order, do what you're told, don't ask questions. The strict West Indian like orthodoxy. It's like as a kid, you're supposed to be seen, not heard. Fall in line. You're only supposed to speak to adults when they speak to you. If not, shut up. All that fun stuff. So I kind of just, to escape all that, I kind of just lived in my own head and had my own world and my imagination, which I credit with just, not ever limiting me. That's what I'll say. It's just like life for me has just been an investigation or exploration of just my imagination, wherever it takes me, provided that I had the legs to go with it.
I love that. The question I gotta ask, it's like, what was the youngest, or sorry, at what age did you take your first subway ride? Because I feel like, to me, I'm always just fascinated, for folks who grow up in New York, like, what was that experience like? Because for us, right, like, for me growing up in Cali, like, kind of we're just driven everywhere. New York's really just that wild concrete jungle where, like, look, you gotta get to class, take the A train to go to the C train, like, there's just the whole maze of public transportation. So, when were you exposed to that?
I could probably say that I took the subway before I could even formulate the idea as a kid. It's probably in part because it's I guess as a New Yorker or just growing up in New York, you can't escape the subways. Like if you're in the five boroughs, you can't not escape the subways. Even if you own a car and you drive, you can't escape it. You have to take it. So I'd say some of my earliest memories of taking the subway would be like pretty much at like 4. I remember, and to just show you how, well, my age and just how far things have come. This would be like when subways were still only a couple quarters, and you exchanged your quarters, not even at kiosks, at the actual booths themselves for tokens. If I probably look somewhere, I probably still have a couple of the MTA tokens, and you'd like drop the token in the slot, and then it would turn, and then you would go through. That's some of my earliest memories of taking the subway, and of course, just New York City subways were a different kind of animal. People want to. I mean, and it's not because I don't say these things to. Before I say anything else, what I'm going to say isn't to glorify or exemplify just the violence and the craziness and chaos of the subway, but for me, it's almost like endemic to the subway. And the reason why I say this is because growing up, you would always hear stories about violence that happened on the subway. And I don't say this to be blasé about it or to normalize it or make it be something that's like accepting of it, but it's just like, if you're going to take the subway, be aware of what's going on around you.
Hmm.
Like, always pay attention to your left and your rights. If you're going to be on the subway platform, like, don't stand too close to the edge. And if you have to, be aware of who's around you, how far the train is. All these little, you expect common sense things that, like, growing up as a kid, like, these things are just drilled into me because you always heard stories. Like, for instance, there used to be a much larger gang presence in New York City in the 90s. So we're talking, like, Bloods and Crips because that was a whole entire movement that, as we all know, that emerged out from Cali in like the
Right.
60s and 70s. And as it transmigrated across the United States, it also manifested itself in New York City, in the inner cities. And unfortunately, the subways were used as a testing ground for many of these gangs. And I say this because you would always hear stories about slashings. That was
Hmm.
a common tactic that the gangs would use for their low level members and their initiates to be brought into the game, specifically the Bloods and of themselves. That was a thing where you could literally be sitting in a subway seat, minding your own business, doors open, and someone just comes out with a switchblade or a straight razor and just straight across your face for no reason, just cause. And I say these things in essence is to understand that just there just need to be a certain level of critical awareness about just who's around you, how they're moving, their energy around them, whether or not they're a perceived threat or not. Because I say this because even now, like as old as I am, and as long as I've been taking the subway, I'm always aware of what's around me. People around me, who's coming on the train, who's coming off, the amount of people, how they're moving, who has a temper, who doesn't, who's acting kind of funny, who's crazy, who doesn't. These are all things that's just like at this point, it's like second nature to me. And I say this because it has its pros and its cons. The cons being that like it's almost like normalize the chaos and the violence. The pros being that like I could literally be unplugged. When I say unplugged, as in like have my headphones on, listening to music, enjoying the jam, taking the subway on the weekend, doing all kinds of like crazy switches between trains without ever having heard a message about like there being delays or anything. Just because I
Right.
know the trains and knowing like what's the chaos that's expected, I can just do it and just get to where I need to go and not bat an eyelash about it. So yeah,
Totally. No,
that's
I mean, I would say, look, I think that's a lot of big cities. You have to be aware. I mean, hey, trust me, even though I live in Cali, I am not the biggest SF fan. You can ask any of my friends. That's like the one major city I avoid like the plague, unless I have to go to the airport. You will very rarely see me socially having a reason to go to SF. So, yeah, I think the one thing with New York, to your point, is like for the most part, it's relatively safe, but you also just to your point, you got to just be aware of where you walk in and things like that. And so, yeah, I was gonna say, man, do you feel like you had that New York pace to walking from the get go, or did you have to kind of evolve into that? Because I think for me, when I first moved there, it was like crazy to just see like walk because people in Cali and everywhere else walk very casually. Walking on the streets of New York is like playing football and you're running back. You gotta power through. Like before, I was like trying to be polite. I don't want to like friggin' like shoulder my way through people. But look, if that train's coming in 30 seconds and I don't know you, I'm going through you to get on that train or like get to my job or whatever. So I guess what was that like for you?
well, I would say in part it's different as a kid because generally speaking, adults kind of give deference to kids. Well, to the extent that like growing up, you still look like a kid because once I reached a
Right.
certain height, you know, people didn't necessarily perceive me as a kid anymore, even though I might have been like early teen or preteen. It was like the unfortunate side effect of just, race relations in the United States, which is a whole other can of worms.
Right.
But as a kid, it was different in the sense that, like, yeah, people might give up their seats for you because got the shortest legs on the train. I mean, unless you're
Right.
old or pregnant. Yeah,
True.
you saw as a kid, you saw how adults moved. It was a bit different because also it's just like the neighborhoods were different. As in, like, you could see how when someone was from one neighborhood, they moved differently than someone else from another neighborhood, and people generally just did their best not to mess with each other and stay in their own lanes. And yes, they had that like be about their business, like seriousness of like going to and fro, like unless it was like you ran into your old dog or your homegirl and two were linking up and then y'all matching wavelengths. But generally, people just went to point A to point B, minded their own business, weren't trying to start no trouble because it's New York. Everyone got an uncle, everyone got an aunt, everyone got a cousin, and no one's trying to start some beef or start some problems because New York City is kind of place that like makes you tough as nails because people won't hesitate to tell you go fuck yourself or.
They'll say it with a smile too. They're polite. They're polite. I gotta give them credit. They're polite with it. The message
Yeah.
might be a little tough, but they'll say it with a smile. They act like it's nothing to it and just go
Yeah.
about their day.
I mean, I'll say the one thing as a kid that was different was that, at least in my day, like as a kid, you had respect for adults. So there are certain things you wouldn't say in their presence. And then, of
Right.
course, in turn, there are things that conversations and things that, adults would not like loudly talk about in the presence of children. If the new kids were around, they just silence. And it was like as a kid, you stayed out and away from adults' business. And in turn, they, kept you excluded. So there was that like difference or distinction. Like as a kid, it was just like, yeah, you'd see all these big, tall individuals all around you, and it didn't really bother you. Some might, some of the older ladies might think you're cute, and like try and pinch your cheeks and stuff. But that would be the extent of it as a kid. But as you grew, you learned. So it's kind of just, as you said, getting acclimated to the environment, seeing the pace at which people move, seeing how the kids your age moved, and just hearing their stories. Because obviously, kids always talk, especially playtime in the playground or stories in the middle of class, and you're supposed to be paying attention to teachers talk, but that shit's boring, so everyone's just like, passing notes along, like, hey, you hear about so and so and this and that and the third. And so you heard stories, you saw things with your own eyes, and that's how you learn to, move at that tempo as a kid. Because if you didn't, you would get left in the dust, unfortunately. And yeah, I can tell you that there were many kids who got left behind or didn't quite get up to speed, or if they did get up to speed, it was at a much later age. But at that point, they were already so far out of the game, they couldn't really catch up.
That's reality, though. That makes sense. Like, for you, know, I know you also mentioned that you had a slightly different experience because you went to private schools too, right? Later on in your childhood. So I guess what was that like for you? Like going from public to private schools, just fundamentally then too, from other people you've talked to, what makes, I guess, private schools in New York like a little bit more intense, if it was?
Again, I even in that regard, I'll say that my experience is also incredibly unique because, well, I may have alluded to it. I'm the youngest of four, so I have three older siblings. So that whole entire route of like going from public school to private school was something that they all did, and so I got to like see them experience it and hear about
Mhm.
their journeys and their difficulties. So by the time it came my turn, it was almost like it was an expectation versus just like, oh, it's something, difficult or arduous. It's like, what's wrong with you? Like, why can't you be like them? Like, come on, you've seen this. Like, you know how this, you know the script. Just read the lines, do your job, and be like your siblings. And I don't say that to like trivialize the experience because it's especially as a kid, it's very difficult to articulate things like culture clash or changes in your environment or dealing with phenomena that sociologists spend decades and write papers on and dissertations on, and the experience of just like going from places where it's like it's mostly Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, West Indians, African, Southeast Asians in the New York City public school system to literally being one, if not two or three people, or being the sole lone majority black population in your whole entire grade or just your class.
Right.
And then just having to have the experience of, unfortunately, having, as they say, to speak for your race.
Oh, that's heavy, man.
Yeah, it's one thing to say these things in the abstract and coin it as a catchphrase, and it's a whole other like animal to just like live it. There's nothing that quite prepares you for it, especially once you learn about the history of the United States, you learn about the history of the civil rights movement, you learn about the history of failed busing experiment of the 1970s and the failures of integration. And there's a whole other stuff that goes with that. Just this idea that because of specific genetic alleles that determine a specific phenotype of just the melanin content in your skin, that your behavior is supposed to be predisposed in such a way, or you're supposed to match the narrative of what's only seen in the papers or what you hear on the radio stations, that you're supposed to be like behaving this way or speaking this way. Or I guess in my unique case, the expectation of me was like I was always supposed to be able to like bust raps and I guess have a fledgling rap career, because that was, I mean, obviously New York City being the birthplace of hip hop,
Right.
that was the expectation. At least in private school. I can't say the same in public school. Public school was more so the case of just like finding your lane and finding your people, whether that be
Mhm.
hoops with the nerds, because that was my thing too. Like I
Right.
played Magic the Gathering. I did the Yu-Gi-Oh thing. I even did chess too. For a time, I even did tournaments. I got crushed, but I did it. It definitely gave me perspective. I will say I definitely pushed myself to do a lot and try different things and never be satisfied with like just like what I have in front of me is good enough. It's just like, no, I know there's so much more. How much further can I go? And then what would really get me going is when people would tell me, no, you can't, or we don't think you can do this, or you're not good enough. That, like, if you want to give me fuel to send me into X mode or overdrive, that's what's going to drive me. Because it's not just going to be about just doing the thing, it's going to be about proving you wrong to your face and demonstrating just by action, your toil and sweat and effort, how wrong you are. Because then I'll come back and show you and demonstrate to you how wrong you were in your assessments. And this is it wasn't just only individuals, like other people I came across, but just like school administrators, teachers, people who just thought that like, oh, he's not getting these good grades, or oh, he's not performing as he should, oh, he's not going the same route as expected as others. And it's just like, no, I'm gonna go and carve out my own path and do my own thing, and make my life my own and take ownership of my life. And that's one of the biggest things too about just growing up, in terms of finding myself and understanding myself, as like from a kid to teenager, and even throughout my 20s, and just before the whole entire just rise of the manosphere. And well, I guess we can get to that later on, but just any and all like influencer content about self-development, I, for myself, was always on my own journey, my own road, my own path of just, if not self discovery, but just having my own sense of self and self affirmation. In part because, the roads I took were very narrow and very few people traveled them. And the few people that did oftentimes had to be exceptional. Like, you had to be without flaw. You had to operate at peak proficiency, be the best of the best. Like, we're talking 3.8s, 4.0s. You couldn't have a blemish on your record. You had to be essentially perfect by almost every measurable metric. That's the bar that, the assessment of which, like, that's the level that you needed to be at to achieve something, at least for the people going down the lane I was. So if you're busy chasing after perfection in everything you do, there's no margin for error. You can't have a bad day. You can't be like, I'm tired, I don't want to do homework, or no, this sports team's too much for me. I don't feel like getting up for practice at like 6 o'clock in the morning in the dead of winter, even though I have to. But I don't want to go to these study sessions to study for these APs. It's too much. It's like, no, that's the expectation. And if you're not cut out to do that, you're just going to get left in the dust. There's no mercy out there. There's people aren't going to cut you slack. In fact, they'll probably be like, oh, look at that poor minority kid. He always knew he just wasn't good enough. You know, it's just too much for him. It's his brain couldn't handle it. It's too bad. You know, it's just how it is. It's like, no, if there's ever one thing that infuriates me is when people try to pity me or think that I'm less than. I mean, obviously bigotry aside and ignorance aside, just in terms of just my efforts and just what I said about myself in my mind to do and to accomplish, is just like, it's just the limitations of just, you know, how many hours there are in a day. Like how much can you operate on a minimum amount of sleep?
This is facts. Dupy does not sleep. I will text him at like 12:31 a.m. responding to some of the memes he'll send me. I get a response right away. I'm like, dude, it's like 1 a.m. PST. And it's 4 a.m. PST. What are you doing? I know you haven't slept. Wow, man, there's so much to unpack there. So I think one, you talked about thriving off motivation from others. Trust me, I believe it. I love being petty in those scenarios. But if you were like, I know Kobe Bryant talks about this concept of like a hate list. And so like every hater like you've had in your life, like even I like embody that to an extent. Like I'll write the quote and then the person, and it's high on my list. I look at that every day. Gets me fired up. And so if you were to stack rank to this day, right, or even at that age, who would be number one on that hate list? You don't have to drop you don't have to drop the name. You don't have to put them on blast fully. But if you could just maybe describe who is that person even to this day that gets you fired up to like, oh, I'm about to get back all my stuff. Who would that be and why?
How do I put this? It's not necessarily the fact that I have a hate list, because I realized at a very early age that the things that I was going up against, my contentions or just the fight that I was in, wasn't with individuals. It was with institutions. It was with
Mm,
pedagogies. It was with ideas. It was with things and systems that and individuals that you'd see them in the hear about them in the shadows, because you'd never see their faces in public. So
right.
essentially, what I'd be interacting with on a day to day would just be puppets, people pulling their strings. So I think part of just my own just understanding of myself and just my own path to mastering myself was mastering my own emotions. And I
Mm,
say that to the extent of not letting people and things get a rise out of me, and understanding that, like, yes, while I do feel things, it wasn't even necessarily an appeal to stoicism, because I'm not gonna lie and be like, I was reading Marcus Aurelius at the age of 16 or 17. I knew about him, but
right.
I wasn't reading about Epicurus then. I knew of them, but that didn't relate to me because that's not where I was in life. But for me, it was understanding just the emotional toils, the things that I've experienced, the difficulties, the hardships, the racism, the profiling, and understanding just, you know, how these systems try to catch people up, and then just not letting those things master me, as in not letting those things dictate how I innately thought about myself and how I carried myself, and, you know, taking me off my path and my vision. Because for me, the hate in of itself, it's almost akin for me to love. And the reason why I say that is because when you say you, at least for me, when you say you hate something, it's almost as if you're taking that thing and placing it on like a pedestal and elevating it above everything else, to the extent that, like, when you see that thing, when you hear about that thing, everything else gets pushed to the side, and you give that thing center stage in your life. Because at that moment and at that time, that thing has such a level of preeminence for you that you have to dedicate your energy and your time and your feels trying to figure out ways to feed that hatred or destroy that thing that you hate. And so I never in my life, I never really let people or specific things get to that point of hatred. Like, I could count on my hands the times I've gotten angry about things or let things get me angry, because at least I understood for myself that, like, reaching an actual point of anger would actually allow for that anger to consume me. And once I'm consumed by anger, it's a blind anger. It's not going to be rational. It's not going to be thought out. It's not going to be contemplative. So I was very particular and almost, I'm saying, how do I put this?
You
I
don't
don't
no
know
need to
the right
pardon your
word.
French on this show. You're good.
No, it's not. I just want to be precise with what I'm saying. Like, it wasn't just that I was just, how do I put it, wary of giving into my feelings and emotions. Like, yes, I have those feelings and emotions, but It's just the fact that I'm not going to let them rule over me and actively dictate my hand. Because in essence, it's like if you're ruled by your emotions and feelings, all it takes is to let someone else or something else understand what those feelings and emotions are, and then they rule over you. As in, you're no longer the master of your captain of your soul. Shout out to Invictus. Something else is, and so you're not at the wheel like dictating like, am I driving down this road because I want to be down this road, or am I doing it because someone else has told me to do it? Someone else has placed me here to, be the hand on the wheel pushing me down this path. Because that's the biggest thing for me behind anything that I ever did in my life. Is just like I did it because ultimately I wanted to do it, not because it was the right thing to do, not because it looked good or you know challenged the norm or pushed boundaries and limits on things. It's like I did it because I wanted to do it. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what's going to be there. There'll be people with you or people without you. It's just going to be. And if you can't be satisfied with what you see when you look in the mirror, then the life you're living isn't your own. It's someone else's life that you're living.
That's a bar. And that is the most Dupy response I could expect, which I loved. No, I think the other part, man, I want to talk about, I think a lot of people are dealing with now is that feeling of being lonely, right? And I think we all heard the saying, it's lonely at the top. And I love Hormoz, and he preaches that too. Like there's just seasons to where look, and I empathize with that now. It's like where it's like you're not quite where you want to be yet, so you haven't really made that new set of friends or acquaintances that see the world similar to you or same level of ambition, right? But you're not quite that old version of you that fits in with like your other friends and such. And so I think for you, to your point, you've had multiple variations of that throughout your life, right? Like you talked about going from being in public school, being the youngest, now in private school, there was certain expectations of what is it like to be who you are, right? In a public or a private school setting. And then even as you navigated through adulthood, through college, through the work, and even now, right? Like we're always evolving. And so I guess given that, how have you found a way to like stay true to you through that? Because it's tough, man. I think it's like those seasons where you're like, you don't really have a lot of people to talk to about things because they don't see the world as the same as you is tough.
I will say again, this goes to keep with the undercurrent to the main way that was when I started this. It's just like again, a lot of just what I consider to be my youth and my childhood wasn't like other kids. It's because literally as a teenager, I wasn't necessarily going out and hanging out with kids my age. I mean, I did, but that's not all I did. Like what I did in part
Right.
was like literally be in the presence of like 50 and 60-year olds and 40-year olds, like listening to their stories and like gaining their wisdom and asking them questions about their lived experiences. Because me at heart, I'm a sucker for a good story. So if you have a good story, doesn't matter who you are. If you have a good story about yourself, could be about someone else. I'm always just down to listen, just like I'm reading a book or something. As you narrate, I'm just flipping through the pages. It's like, what happened next? Like, what's going on? I always took it upon myself to listen to like what my elders would say, even if I didn't agree with it, even if I thought they were wrong, even if it's like that shit don't make sense. I would never think to necessarily say that to their face because obviously
Right.
at least for me growing up, that was still a thing, like having
Right.
respect for your elders. And so a lot of my perspective on things came from just the wisdom that I gained from just listening to their lived stories and listening to just what they were talking about in terms of like their friends, their experiences, just having that how do I put it? Just having that as a baseline just to go off of, just being able to turn to the elder statesmen, the wise sage elder women in your life that you could like actually ask for advice and not turn to Google, I guess, because Google wasn't really a
Right.
big thing back then, or the internet, well, it was there, wasn't necessarily what it is now. Uh, and then just also be directed towards books. A lot of what I did in terms of just my own understanding of myself and then just what I was on and just my purpose was just reading. Probably read at this point hundreds of books in my time, just like whether it be through schooling or just of my own interests. But I will say a lot of what helped me, at least put me on a journey towards just going down a path of understanding myself and understanding the people in my life, or just my purpose and place with the people in my life, was just reading a lot of 20th century philosophy in the form of existentialism. Wow, that word in of itself, existentialism, is a lot to unpack. I don't know if we're gonna do it. I mean, I can if you want to, but
Hey,
it's a lot.
speak your
It's a lot
truth,
to
man. I'm here
unpack,
for it.
especially as a 17-year-old, 16-year-old, well, probably more so 16, 17, yeah, 17-year-old. Just trying to understand yourself as being a teenager in life, and just understanding just like existence. What does that mean? What does that mean in the context of just know, the 21st century at the time? So that's that point. Yeah, we passed the 20th century. What did it mean for the French writers like your Sartre, your Camus, and others? Like, what did it mean to them? Like, did they even call themselves that? And what could I discern from the wisdom from their writings? Because it's not like they had like long treatises on like existentialism. It's like, no. In addition to that, they wrote through like plays and allegories and stories, and it would be from having to understand these stories, like, you know, Huis Clos, which is French for no exit, or the myth of Sisyphus, trying to understand just what it means to live and exist in this space, and how that influences others and your roles and your responsibilities as an individual existing in a space, and what that means to you, and your obligations to you and the people around you. That heavily influenced just a lot of my own interest and pursuits at the time. It just got me thinking, and just, helped push me forward, because yeah, like as a teenager, as an early 20-year-old, like a lot of people just don't take you seriously, and they don't necessarily think that you have perspective, because it's like, yeah, you're still just a kid. Our society still treats our teenagers and 20 somethings as kids. It's like, no, who are you? Like, what are you talking about? Like, they're still just a kid. They don't know anything. So I used a lot of that, like just the wisdom and stories, a lot of literature, and things that I read up on, to just help inform me, and give me perspective. Because the biggest thing for me is like having perspective.
Mm.
Because I feel without having perspective, or having a perspective, you can't stay grounded. And once you aren't grounded, or grounded in reality, or grounded in fact, you're, at least from what I've read and my own experiences, it's almost like you're unbound. It's like you're not tethered down to anything. You're constantly just flowing wherever the wind takes you, or wherever the crowd's going, or wherever it's just, exerting a pressure influence on your life. You're not rooted in something that helps, anchor your personality and anchor you in the sense of who you are, regardless of night, day, rain, shine. You almost are not even a blank slate, but just sand on a beach that just, rolls with the tide.
You're floating, essentially. That's the best way to put it. And I love that, because I think, to me, man, my favorite class in college was philosophy, because, again, it taught me, like, how to, I think, a critical adult skill. Again, my allergies are killing me, so apologies for that. I was like, look, we may not see the world the same, but I can respect and understand where you're coming from. And I think a lot of times, especially, hey, you go to these spaces like Twitter, Instagram, God knows what other or Discord or Reddit. Like, it's
4chan.
the wild, wild west, man. It's you got to tame yourself. It's wild. So yeah.
Well, the thing about it too is just like with perspective, it's like it almost allows you to like parse through the bullshit immediately. Like having had perspective on things, and having seen different perspectives, having had people challenge my stance on things, and even for myself, like for all the things that I know that there's so much that I don't know. That's why I'm always constantly like trying to challenge my assertions on things, or things that I believe was like, grounded fact or truth. Not necessarily because, it's like, oh, he's a flat earther. It's like, no, it's because I want to always constantly means test and value test the things that I stand on, so that it almost serves as its own affirmation to ground me even further into that belief, or that understanding of that thing. And having put myself through that own rigorous process, and then also just having, grown up in that crucible that, alluded to earlier, just constantly just having to chase after perfection and excellence, you can immediately tell who's not about that. Like, who's
Right.
not about that life, who's on some BS, who's chasing gimmicks, who's pushing a fad, who's just chasing an algorithm, who's rage bait farming, versus just like who actually wants to sit down and have a substantive, meaningful, engaging discourse, where they're actually going to hear you out and hear what you have to say, versus just hear themselves talk in an echo chamber.
I love that. And I think, too, that brings me to my next topic I wanted to break down with you is, look, I think you and I both, we had a lot of pleasure growing up in terms of, like, being able to have live conversations with people, right? Whether it's like, mentors, just, folks who maybe just who just experience life more than we have at that point, right? Whether we were in high school or college, even once we started our careers. For us now, it's really a digital world. And I think too, like the pandemic accelerated that. And so you have a lot of people now. Hey, you can position yourself as an authoritative figure with very minimal things to do. You can kind of position yourself to really be like an expert in something when you're really not. And for someone who hasn't seen that, they can really just assume that this person has good intentions when they really don't. So I guess in this digital world, what advice do you have for folks to really filter out like who's someone that like is credible and you should maybe take advice from potentially versus who's maybe someone you'd probably take what they say like with a grain of salt, as you would if someone like you don't know that you meet in person for the first time talking about things.
I'll say the first thing is above everything else is mindset. Accept nothing, challenge everything. Take everything you hear with a grain of salt, even if it's something that's universally accepted. Challenge it. Ask questions about it. Be curious. As I said, like for me, transcending like just the lived experiences, harsh experiences that I've been through is just for the fact that I just always had a curiosity, always ask questions, dumb questions, perceived smart questions, pointed questions, ask questions. Because people who actually have the substance to them that are grounded and rooted in something, they'll have the information for you. Because it becomes very clear that once you start asking people questions who claim to be experts, who don't have the expertise, who don't have the knowledge, they'll start hitting you with either questions in response, like, why are you asking me this? Or they'll give you one word answers versus like actually sitting down and, opening up the pages of the book that is their mind even further and exposing you to a great amount of information and fact about themselves, their perspectives, their lived experiences, and what they know about the world. And I'll say, in addition to that, is read. Never stop reading. Even now, I got books. I have books around me. I have articles. I read the paper still, not physical paper, because when I used to have a subscription to the New York Times, the guy would always deliver it after I left for work. It was just like, you know what? It's not even worth it. So I just canceled it. So I just read
Yeah, that's
online these
personal.
days.
I'd be taking that personal.
Literally, because I come back home and it's like, oh, okay, the paper's here, but it's like the day's already over. So it's like I'm just
Right.
reading it after the fact. So all those information tidbits, it's like it's already in the past. And as you know, we live in a digital age. Everything's moving a mile a minute. It's like you're like 16 steps behind with the paper already by the time you're reading it in the evening afternoon on
Right.
most things. So that those are two things. It's like ask a lot of questions and read because you're not going to learn about the world from it from solely looking at the internet, from YouTube videos. You're going to learn about the world through opening up and reading through pages in books. There's a reason why they banned books. There's a reason why historically books used to get burned. It's because books, in part, oftentimes will say some unsavory things about the world and the people in it and the people pulling the strings from behind the curtains. The Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtains. To just open your eyes and give you perspective on things. Because I think that's a game changer for folks is like actually having perspective.
I support that 1,000%. With that, right, with this digital age, we already entered it, but I think embracing, AI in our day to day lives is becoming more and more mainstream. And so we've talked, off Broadway about it too, but would love to get your thoughts. Like, again, I see a lot of value with it, but I also am not oblivious to the repercussions, right, and how this is going to shift a lot of what we thought was our normal moving forward. So I guess from your perspective, how do you see AI being more beneficial, right? Like in an academic, professional setting, or even personal? Here, I know, like for someone like you love to consume a lot of information. You're also a really creative person, and you're also really active. So I guess how have you maybe found ways to leverage AI to do things that you haven't done before? Or are you still a little skeptical in certain lanes of using it versus others?
I'm highly skeptical about AI. And the reason why I say this is because after having lived the amount of years that I've lived and having been forced to critically think about the world and critically think about things, I just can't unthink critically about the world. As in, like, I'm not going to co sign or just sign off my critical thinking to an external party or an external element. And that's not to say that there is any utility in using artificial intelligence. But again, I'm looking at it from the larger picture of the people who create and code these large language models, who code and feed or fire inputs into these things. And I'm using that as my litmus test to dictate, how close I am going to be to this or how further away I'm going to keep myself from it. And the reason why I said this is because as a creative, having created things, the things you create are always going to be about a reflection of you. That's whether
Hmm.
it be programming, whether it be painting, whether it be in sculpture, print. It's always going to be a reflection of the person and the spirit of the person who's created it. So if you're creating something with bad intentions, you're creating something to challenge accepted norms or paradigms of which people operated under. The thing that you create, whether willingly or unwillingly, wittingly or unwittingly, is going to be the embodiment of that and carry that spirit within it. And that's not to ascribe a religious element to this because we're talking obviously technology, we're talking coding, numbers, data. But again, this goes back to my point about perspective on these things. It's like you can still skew data in such a way, you can still pull numbers in such a way that you can try and paint a certain narrative about things. And we've seen the pitfalls and heard about the pitfalls of AI and of itself in professional settings where it's made up fake case law for lawyers and custom cases because literally the judge is like, pull up these cases that you're citing. And meanwhile, the first year associate who didn't know any better is like, all right, let me go search this up on the books. All these cases were made up. And I say this also like having worked with AI in professional settings, like especially in the legal space before I even got to doing what I do now. There's always going to be a need for the human element. I would never tell anyone to not use AI, but I'll always tell people to always put themselves first in the equation, as in always ask questions, even question what you're getting as an output from the AI, and because oftentimes AI is going to give you a bunch of bullet points to your query. Read further, investigate the sites, investigate the sources, dig deeper, treat it as if like you're doing a research project. Because I've heard now that especially in academia, academics are complaining about how AI is destroying that's because you guys. I have a whole other separate critique and diatribe about academia, but
Let him
it's like
cook. Hey, go
so
for it.
much of what academics, especially those in institutions of higher learning, have fallen victim to is that they fall victim to the sense that they're in their ivory towers and that no one can challenge them or tell them otherwise, and that what they've been doing for the past however many years that they've been involved with their pedagogy, they know best and no one knows better. Is that when you get something like a tool such as AI that allows folks to supplant or circumvent their narratives or their ideas of what they think is best, it's like their world is blown. It's like you finally found, the arrow that hits Achilles' heel. It's like if you actually want to test your students and engage them, there are ways around it. I even said this on a Reddit for me the other day. It's just like there are complaints about like, oh, how papers have been ruined and all this other nonsense. It's just like, no, it hasn't. Like instead of just assigning it as home, make it all in class. Give pop quizzes. Just don't tell them when the pop quiz is happening.
Yeah.
Or make it purely based on your lectures, because obviously your lectures, excuse me, unless you're recording them and having them be digitized and transcribed, they're one for one. They're not gonna be out there on the web anywhere else. Like there are ways around these things, like in terms of just people not being able to see a way around just the unique elements or qualities of the human mind and its capacity to function, its capacity to excel, versus just allowing a series of inputs to do the thinking or spin out a form of thinking for you. Because at the end of the day, AI in of itself, it's not human. It's not going to have feelings. It's not going to have a sense of value. It's not going to have a sense of development, weight, and worth. All it's going to do is just get faster in its ability to process information and quantify data and potentially get closer to having an answer to a question that it's that's just as an input. And another thing too is like especially when you talk about artificial intelligence in creative spaces, it's like a lot of those artists or folks who call themselves artists or creative these days, the ones who especially relied on digital media, they're now living to suffer the consequences of their own hubris about not thinking about what it means to put their creative properties or creative works in these spaces, on these platforms, that sign away their rights on these end user licensing agreements. Take, for instance, I mean, obviously it's not their fault, Studio Ghibli.
Right.
For as prominent and preeminent as it was in the 20th century and early 21st century of what that studio did in terms of its productions, because I'm a huge fan of Studio Ghibli. It's now turned into a trivialized meme filter that, Mickey Studio Ghibli this or that. And it's just like,
I agree with you. I think for me, my point, only pushback I have in terms of the creative side now, I feel like it unlocks some of the thinking, if that makes sense. Like, say, for example, or say you've always wanted to do music, right? Like, you could prompt GPT, be like, hey, look, I've always wanted to do music. Here's some of my interests, right? Here's a little bit of my life story. How should I start to plan my first couple songs, right? So I think too, just for me, I empathize because I'm a serial overthinker. Like, I will overthink a lot of things, and so it can help you start the ball, like get the ball rolling. Right now, to your point, you can't only rely on AI like to do that, but I do think it kind of levels the playing field for people who actually want to do something, whether that's creative or in business or do whatever. Like, they can just allows them to be them and gets rid of the thinking to start, at least. Obviously, like GPT or these tools, they haven't done some of these things themselves. It's kind of, like, so it can't fully guide you, but it can help start that process. So I guess how do you view that, at least? Ain't gonna hold back, man. Fire away. I love it.
I'm gonna say again, it almost feels like it's a cop out, and I say this because, like, again, I'm going from a purist perspective. It's not to say that like my perspective is the end all be all, but just having gone through the trials and tribulations of just going out there and doing things like picking up an instrument, learning how to read sheet music, learning how to compositions, understanding chords, tritones, understanding how to actually compose music electronically through like systems like Reason, Acid, Pro Tools, Fruity Loops. Having listened to other, like, not just composers and their ideas, like classical composers, but like music producers, like over the past 4 decades. It's like there's so much out there that's like it's almost like just a click away, that it's just like you just need to be curious and almost just being like, I want to create a song, but I want to do it from like the periphery of just like not immersing myself in music, not immersing myself in instrumentation, not immersing myself in musicianship, or just if you really want to go down that route, the academic scholarship of music and music theory and composition. It's almost like you're doing yourself a disservice, and it's just like you're taking a very sanitized take on it. It's just like, yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but it's almost like, to give you an analogy, it's like saying you want steak, but what you've gotten is just like a strip of sanitized beef from a hospital versus like actually going to a steakhouse and getting like the 5-star chef's prime cut of the day that's like been made in their artistry of just mastery of just years of being in a steakhouse and being behind a stove working these things to put it on your plate and have for you. That's how I would.
Right.
That's almost how I would see it. There's nothing wrong inherently. If that's the experience you want, it's not my place to tell you what you should or shouldn't have for yourself.
Right.
I would just say it's almost like you're amputating the experience if you want to just purely engage it from a single query of just like, I just only want to engage in something from a high level analysis of just only like, that one thing you've thought out versus like dug deeper, because that's the thing that really is going to inform you, that's going to feed you as a person, that's going to feed your existence and help have you be grounded is, what's your stake in this? Like, do you have skin in the game? Do you care about this? Are you passionate about it? Obviously, not everything you have a question for is going to be something you're curious about, but it's for the fact that you use these things, especially as you go through life. And this is something that also, helped me like get through some of my more difficult classes in life, was just like taking the information that was given to me or just thrown at me, making sense of it, even if I didn't agree with it or liked it, but I found ways to incorporate it into my life or just see it play out in the world around me. Like, so to give you an example, whenever I would see different changes in the world, whether it be seasons, freezing water, gas residue pipes. I would always go back to one specific thing in chemistry that I always just, I just see play out in the world around me. It's, the ideal gas law. PV equals NRT. Now,
Right.
don't ask me how or why that always has stuck with me or why I always see that, but it's always like, the relationship between pressure and volume, versus Planck's constant and temperature, they have a relationship with each other. And you see it just play out in the natural world around you, even if you know nothing about the ideal gas law or about the molecular mass of things or just about pressure or volume. You just see it play out in the world around you. And it's like, it's things like that that like just help me like, again, just stay grounded and just have a connection to the places and peoples and things around me, even if they could never relate to just, chemistry or just the ideal gas law. It's like
Right.
just being able to speak about change or, changes in matter, changes in volumes, changes in things. You can relate and connect to things. It gives you attachments to the world. Even though I wouldn't call myself a chemist. I wouldn't say that I'm, an expert in chemistry. It's just like I took what I learned in school and applied it to just, my perspective and vision on things. To a certain degree, I also helped it to inform my art as well, which is a whole separate other conversation. But yeah, the perspective, it's almost like a superpower, just having perspective. I can't quite stop just, getting back at that point.
Fair enough. Hey, we could talk about that point for hours, but I want to be respectful of your time too, man. So I guess my last question I always ask everyone is, hey, man, you've done a lot of dope things. You're gonna continue do a lot of crazy things in a good way. If you were to sit down with 18-year-old Dupy for coffee, say like he hits you up, let's go grab coffee in downtown Brooklyn, right? And he asks, look, man, what advice would you give me? What would that be and why?
That's funny that you asked that question because I've asked myself that question on many times, many occasions. It's just like, would I tell my younger self, the kind of shit that he's in for, or would I just keep quiet and be like, nah, he needs to learn this so he can fundamentally change and get out of his
Like
own
he's
state of
asking you to throw
being?
him a bone. Like just throw him a bone. Like maybe you don't give him the full cheat code, in the spirit of AI, but if you were to throw him a bone
I would. One
and
thing
have
I
him
would
sit on
definitely tell my younger self is to buy a whole fucking bunch of Bitcoin. I don't care how you do it, how you get it, get Bitcoin. Because I know at least at that point, like I had access to cash, and because I was doing work study, I was working on.
yeah.
I worked all throughout my time in college, so I knew I was gonna be making money. One thing I regret again is just like not buying Bitcoin because, and it's not to say that like I would be a millionaire at this point, but just like to have that as an asset versus like not have an asset and just
Yeah.
be paying on the back end of consequences of the bad decisions and choices of a whole bunch of baby boomers and Gen Xers effing things up for all of us. It's a whole other conversation for another time.
Say that for the next episode for sure.
That's one thing I would tell my younger self. Another thing I tell my younger self is to enjoy the ride. Actually, enjoy enjoy the experience. Stay away from the fast girls because they ain't trying to get no one pregnant. Thankfully, I don't have that as an issue. But I just keep hammering that home.
Uh,
It's just like, stay away from them fast girls and try and get you jammed up. Let me see. I'm just thinking. I would also probably tell myself that one thing that would have radically changed my direction, perspective on things is to actually just like leave home, move out completely. Like even after college, just like don't come back home. Just go out there, take a chance, take a bet. It may suck, but do it. I felt like that would have definitely helped further my growth and perspective on things. Because unfortunately, that's to almost come full circle.
yeah.
It's almost like having been in New York all my time. I'm not to say that like it's an elder statesman at this point. From what I've seen, it's like most of my friends, public school or otherwise, having been born and raised in New York, they ultimately end up finding far more success being away from New York. So they've found other jobs, they found other careers. Housing's obviously much cheaper. And it's almost like
Hey,
they're thriving elsewhere. Wherever in the world they are, they're doing a whole bunch of things. And I don't say this to like, be like, a chatty patty and talk about other people's work. You can have that conversation offline if you're curious. But
for part two. No, we saving it for part two.
for sure, I will say that that's one thing that I definitely should have done because that's something I realized too. Is at the age of 18, it was just like if I'm gonna grow as an individual, I need to leave New York because you reach a certain point, you reach a certain saturation point where it's just like at least for me, in terms of how self-aware I was at the time, it's just like if I want to continue to have the radical exponential growth as an individual in terms of my perspective on the world and the people and places in it, I need to go out there and experience more in the world. And that's one of the reasons why, like, I pushed and tried my hardest to try and leave New York for college. But unfortunately, as you know, with domineering West Indian parents, it's like Ivy or bust. So it's like either you choose to go to an Ivy institution or 18-year-old me who didn't know any better, who wasn't financially literate, and was scared of the world, was like, all right, I'll go to an Ivy, and the rest is history.
Feel that, man. Well, wow. I think we foreshadowed to the next part of our recording, which will come out in due time, but putting it out there. So, with that, man, it was a pleasure. I learned a lot that I didn't know about you before. I know the audience will get a lot of value out of it, and we're gonna have a part 2 coming out very soon. So with that, that's us signing off from the AU show. We appreciate the love and stay tuned for the next one.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.